So you have a lot of arguments out there that are Buddhism or Hinduism or Immanuel Kant and theories of ethics and theories of morality and philosophy, quantum physics, evolution. And all these arguments are designed to take people ultimately out in disparate directions, away from the truth. I will say that your ability to go out and grab all those theories and then bring them back, and from what I call, he went out with a very liberal, large reach and a large funnel, and you funneled them all back through Christ and made an argument for why, in fact, if you do not take those and funnel them back through what we call the narrow road.
Right.
So then they're just going to ripple on in the direction they're going throughout eternity and cause more and more separation and more dilution of the potency of any of them. And actually they run actually would contradict their own theories, because if they don't unify, then their argument for unification is they've unraveled their own argument.
Yes,
is how I interpreted your overall argumentative strategy.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you saw that. Thank you. So one of the things that I it was made clear to me intuitively and in prayer throughout writing this is I'm not to argue against anybody.
Right.
This isn't to be an argument. It's just to be a statement of certain truths, which, when put together, has a coherence and an explanatory power that argues itself. Okay, it doesn't have to come against anything, but it's such an integrated picture of why the world is the way it is and what God is doing about it, that because it's integrated, it's more beautiful than any competing picture. It doesn't require that we bite the bullet on any topic.
No, you made friends with all of them. He made friends with all of them, and just what was their what was the destiny through time from their theories, and he brought them forth to a unified destiny.
And it's really interesting that you bring this up as the first point, because there's a message in here that isn't explicitly stated that I was going to state either in a revision of this draft, it's still in draft form, or in the format of New Apologetics. And it's something that the church has more or less stated explicitly, particularly recently with the attempt to begin a New Apologetics with Scott Hahn and Father Barron. They actually have a YouTube video where they talk about the notion of non-subtraction. And it's very much what you're saying here. And let me explain what I wanted to say that was then confirmed independently by Father Barron and Scott Hahn, is that the human will cannot attach itself to something evil for its own sake. Okay, we're not attracted to evil in itself. We're attracted to a good that is, if we're doing an evil or willing an evil, we're willing a good, but in a disordered way. We're holding on to a good, but in a way that sets us up against other goods. We're holding on to a truth, but we're setting ourselves in opposition to other truth. Whereas the true and the good, in themselves, the ultimate truth and ultimate good, don't have any of that opposition, but take whatever is good and true and harmonize it together. Okay, so there are many different people who have many different worldviews and adhere to them quite ardently and are completely unresponsive to any criticism. Okay, so entrenched worldviews, everyone defending their own piece of the true and the good. But really, what's attracting them to do that, what's attracting them to hold on to their view, is what's actually true and good about that view. And everybody is holding a piece. And in that holding of the peace, we make the mistake of thinking that if I hold my peace, I have to be against you holding your peace. But really, there's a harmony of all of these pieces. And in the Catholic faith, when it's presented authentically, it will take all of those pieces and not negate them. Take any one of those pieces and not negate them, but amplify it to its perfection and add the rest of what was erroneously excluded, mistakenly excluded. For example, and this is the perfect example, I'm unable to think of a better one. Christopher Hitchens, the infamous atheist, debated a lot of religious people, different faiths, debated non-religious people on different issues, but was very indignant about the injustices of the world. He was bitterly angry about them. And when he would debate a Christian on this topic, invariably, the Christian would come back with a retort that would diminish Christopher's position of indignation, as if the injustices that he was in touch with weren't so bad, okay? And that the right thing to do would be to go along with this and say, well, you know, there's a purpose behind it. We don't know what it is, but there's a purpose. And Christopher, you know, it's very arrogant for you to be so upset about this. How do you know that God isn't working so good? And then Christopher would give this, you know, fantastic example of some horror and say, well, heaven was silent in the face of, couldn't we at least have some consolation? Why, okay. Now, the indignation of this seems to be, on the face of it, contrary to religious belief. That's what all of his debate partners said or implied. That he would have to, if he became a Christian, he would have to somehow get rid of that hatred of evil. But is that so? Is that so? Really, he was in touch with an aspect of reality that the Christians weren't in touch with, for the most part. And the authentic presentation of the situation that we're in, vis-a-vis evil, how does God see evil? With infinite indignation. That Christopher's was just a dim intimation of that infinite offense that is the suffering of the innocent. And so now, if Christopher were presented with the Catholic faith authentically, would he have to renounce his hatred of injustice? Would he have to rein that in at all? No. He would take that and plug it into the rest of the truth, which is that God has reconciled all things to himself in his own body. Okay, and that hatred of evil would be holy. Okay, and that's right. We have something to learn about that as a church. We're all too willing to say, "Oh, it's not so bad. It's not so bad that the tornado took your child and flung her across the field." God has a purpose. Not directly in that. He saves us from the purposelessness and awfulness and insult to human dignity that is by transforming it in himself. But there's no purpose for which he established. Okay, it really is the horror that it seems to be, and Christopher was right about that. So we need to return to a view. Return, I say, not invent. Return to a view that sees evil as evil, and good as good, and God as good, and therefore against evil, and to understand all the truths of the faith in light of those basic, unshakable fundamentals. And if we monkey with those fundamentals, even though we have the right words and right propositions to show forth orthodoxy, we're not orthodox because we have denied who God is and who we are. And we won't fully understand the problem and the solution that is the gospel. So
we called out that same example in the car, remember?
Mm-hmm.
That we atheism.
Well, you did. I was just listening.
Okay, the idea that if you have determine your paradigm being atheism. It's really a self-manufactured belief system to help you justify your lack of understanding in God's ultimate purpose behind behind suffering existing.
Sure, but also, really, there's the reality that the thought of there being a God who orchestrates the horrors that we experience, or don't directly experience, but other people do, who orchestrates this as a means to an end. The consideration of that. For some people who are sensitive and in touch with just how bad evil is, it's so awful to think that someone is in charge of that it would be better if we were just alone.
Right. Well,
okay. Now, in a way, that's true. Okay. In a way, that's true. If God is somehow on the side of these evils and not perfectly against them, not for us in that sense, not a defender of innocence, but a violator of it for some. Okay. Then that's not really God anyway. That's some pagan, pseudo God. It's something that we're projecting. It's evil. If God exists, he has to be against these evils as we are against them. And this isn't saying that we understand exactly what's good for us, that we understand the infinite good, but we do know, and the church defines, that suffering, when considered in itself, apart from the redemption, apart from what God does with it to change it, is an evil. And the church also defines, and we can argue philosophically independently of this through reason alone, that God exists and God is perfectly good, a perfect being. And if suffering is an evil and God is infinitely good, well, God is against evil and he's infinitely against it. There's no degree of approval. But all of the philosophical rhetoric on this topic compromises that, saying, no, there's some, he's either causing it for a purpose or approving of it in some degree. He's holding back in his opposition for some purpose that uses the evil as a means to an end. And that's neither entailed by any Catholic teaching, nor is it entailed by any principles of reason, and it entails, when we take it into ourselves, it entails the total destruction of our authentic hope, really, that there is goodness that we would want to be with. That there's a God who we would really want to be with. It isn't a struggle to have to, swallow this prospect of being with this person who, really isn't for us. So what I'm saying is that good is good, evil is evil, and God being good is against evil, and the church agrees. But the theorists around this have compromised and say something. They don't explicitly come out and admit it, but all of the theories imply or state that God is complicit in evil.
Certainly that's implied, not to interject, certainly that's implied at least in, some priests, good or bad or,
sure.
Whatever. I think, at least I've heard that, in a sermon, kind of that implication that, we don't really know, we just have to pray that it's for the best and that it's part of the plan, like that kind of, that phrase in particular.
Yeah, and famously, and this is not to bring Father Karapi back from the closet here, but when he was in his prime, made as the centerpiece of his preaching, and this is what he did his doctoral dissertation on, the problem of evil, and his understanding of what the church has given us as the solution. And it was really a very big misunderstanding. What he said is, God permits evil in order to draw a greater good out of it, quoting Thomas Aquinas. Okay. Now, the way Father Karapi held that and taught it is that God either is causing suffering to people or is very much in approval of, say, your house burning down so that you can learn to trust God and not your finances. And he can, when you give your permission to God to make you holy, he will run you through a gauntlet of tragedy and it's for a greater good. And the tragedy is orchestrated by his hand. And he gave analogies of when he was in the military, his drill sergeant, put one of the cadets in a closet with a snake. Well, why? To make him tougher. And he said that, God does essentially the same thing. This is a very serious problem. Aquinas' teaching doesn't entail any of that. By permits, we simply understand does not prevent, okay? But there's a reason why he does not prevent that is something other than he gives some approval to it. He's perfectly opposed to the suffering of the innocent, just like a mother would be perfectly opposed to watching her child being tortured. Okay? God is of the same stance in a greater way than we're capable of, because our love is compromised. His love is perfect, and therefore there's even a greater opposition and a greater offense than what we're capable of echoing. Okay, so yes, Aquinas is right in that sense, but not in the way that people are holding it. It cannot be the case that God approves of any evil in any capacity ever.
I think from an empirical argument, you can say that struggle and suffering and all those can produce change, and that's where people then go, well, God probably did. He designed it that way, as
the
opposed
observation becomes the explanation.
Yes,
and that's the danger.
It's a
But
non-sequitur.
it's coming out of Romans 8:28, and God bringing good from all situations,
Which he does.
And this is true.
Which he does.
Which and you talk about how he rewrites it, but he reorders it after, but he didn't. He wasn't the catalyst for it.
Exactly.
In fact,
sin was.
he
Sin, in fact, was.
reorders it, he perfectly integrates it so that not a thing is wasted and everything is maximally important to bringing about his purposes. He does that because he's perfectly opposed to it.
And this is a critical argument, I believe, that has to be won, because we're losing souls that turn from God because they do not believe that they're going to love this God that would allow this.
Can I read something? Just this is real life. This is from a book, The Power of the Powerless, and it's a story. There's a young family, little boy, and a mother pregnant with what would have been this little boy's younger sister. The little girl dies shortly after birth. And this is the father talking about that. After Lauren died, we had a difficult time telling Tommy, "Mommy's going to have other babies, Tommy. You might have another sister." "I know," he said. "Mommy's going to get fat. She's going to get pregnant. She's going to get fat, go to the hospital, and the baby's going to die." We told Tommy in the hospital that night. They took me down to a waiting room where Tommy was sitting all alone. Nobody else was there, and the room was poorly lit. "Your sister isn't going to be coming home." "Tommy, why?" "The thing is, Barbara," this is the mother's parents, "are really religious. I think they wanted us to tell him something like, 'God took your little sister away because he needed her up in heaven,' or something like that. I didn't want to tell him that. It made God look so bad. I didn't want him being mad at God or thinking that if he needed his sister more, maybe God would have left her with us, and then Tommy might feel guilty. Like it was his fault that his sister died. We just told Tommy, 'Your sister won't be coming home.' She died, Tommy." "Why'd she die?" "She was so sick, nobody could help her." And this is the little boy then. "Well, I guess God didn't listen when I prayed." I didn't know exactly what to say next. "She was so sick, Tommy, even God couldn't help her." That's what I told him, because that's what I thought too. I didn't lie to him. That's what I thought. I read a book once about a man whose life falls apart, and somebody explains to him how life is like a beautiful tapestry, but only God can see the tapestry. Man looks at it from underneath and can't see the whole thing. But if man could be in God's position, he would be able to see the whole tapestry. He'd be able to see how everything fits together in a beautiful plan. That sticks up for God an awful lot, but that doesn't help people who are left behind. And besides, what type of plan could God have with Lauren's death? How could that fit into a plan? What plan could be worth sacrificing a little baby?
That's right.
That's
So, and then I'm sorry, just the author. Who was the author?
Christopher DeVink.
But in addition to a parent, I mean, who?
Well, he didn't. That wasn't Christopher's story. Christopher wrote this book about growing up in a household with a profoundly disabled brother and how his brother's presence transformed everybody's life.
Okay.
And when he started to tell that story, people began to respond to him in reaction. And one of the responses he got was this story about Lauren's death. But it so paints the picture that we all paint because we feel inadequate in the face of something like that.
So I just want to, and this is all good because I think that this helps clarify our understanding, at least, from my perspective. In order for us to achieve your goals that we've laid out, we need to really understand the actual ideas and the arguments behind them as to why they're, so that we can make those compelling cases to the people with whom we come in contact. What I want to do at this point is, unless there are any questions, and I'm sure that there will be, what I'd like to do is talk about some of the initial feedback, and then also talk about some of the plans that we discussed internally and where I think we see this going at this point, so that we can eventually move on to new apologetics.
Yeah, I wonder if people want to talk more about what's on their minds directly rather than going into the agenda at this point. Just what do people feel, especially you guys and everyone at the table, but.
You still want to go over just our
The general
evaluations and reflections?
I want to respond to what you guys want to do. I don't really have a plan other than to just be open to wherever this goes. And it seems to be going into a very important place here, just with what's been said so far. And it seems that we're beginning to see certain things very clearly. And I just wanted to add to something that I said in response to your comment about the universality and things being brought in. With this view of things, and really with the church's view of things, what's important to know in evangelization and in the work of the New Apologetics, independently of newapologetics.com, but just in telling people about God and about the gospel, nobody really has to give up anything in that way, where what Steve read, it seems that when you say what plan could ever justify this, what plan, and it's the same thing that Ivan Karamazov, the atheist in the Brothers Karamazov said, no matter what you tell me, it's not worth it. That even if everyone's going to be happy in the end, at the price of one innocent person being tortured and having this beautiful thing founded on this person's unavenged tears, it's not worth it. And I won't sign on. Okay? Now, the mistake is that we think that view is opposed to what the church proposes for our belief. Everyone is making that mistake. Okay? The atheists and the Christians are making the mistake. But what Steve read, and that view, no plan that sees this as an acceptable thing is a worthy plan. That's the godly view. That's God's own view. He's offended by the evil infinitely, and therefore the redemption is his answer to that. All right? Yeah.
My primary as a novice
Yeah.
litmus test, right, is as I look at a lot of the belief systems out there, right, and including those that are designed to tear down the efficacy of the Catholic Church and so forth. And it always astounds me how much effort people will go through to disrupt things and claim it's been inspired by the Holy Spirit. Because the Holy Spirit, I know, is to bring all things to the truth. Right? The Holy Spirit is to lead all things to the truth. Right? So that was my primary litmus test was you went out and you grabbed many of the world systems and thought systems and brought them all back to the truth. All of them. All of them had to come back to Christ and it's a very significant conclusion that that's the only plan that's going to work if you want, right? So I think that's first. But what really jumped out at me, and I've had this before, we have love in our life, and we have joy in our life, and God can give us love and no, God is love. God is joy. And that's what jumped out at me. That if there was one thing that really jumped out was the dialogue you had about the core argument was a violation against the innocent. That's what hurts us the most, is the people that are innocent.
Yes.
But when you realize that, what's God's view of this? It's not that. When you say God is innocence,
Right.
that's when you realize, God, the innocence that we are concerned with the violation of, He is the innocence. If without Him, there wouldn't even be innocence.
Right.
He is the innocence. That was what really broke for me.
That's it. That's who's really there.
Yeah, and the way we're holding the problem of evil, just as a body of people, we can't see that, okay?
Right.
Because He must see. And I saw this YouTube video with the primary philosophers of our day, both atheists and theists, talking about in sort of soundbite format the problem of evil and what they think about it. It's really quite revealing, and perhaps we could even play it on an iPhone just to hear what people think and how different it is and how it's not tapping into these basic truths. But one of them said, there was a picture of a firefighter carrying a dead child out of a building that had been destroyed in the Oklahoma City bombing. Said, whatever God's love means, it's not something like, I don't know, He's not sentimental. Let's conclude that. I think that's obvious. In other words, He doesn't see what happened to this baby as being all that bad. We might see it as being unthinkably horrific, okay? But if we knew what God knows, it wouldn't be all that bad. And so His love is very different than what we would expect. And this is someone who has dedicated their life to studying philosophy and has specialized in philosophy of religion. That's the best we can do. Another philosopher, the most famous Christian apologist of our time, not Catholic, William Lane Craig, I don't know if you've heard of him, talked about, perhaps God knows how to best engineer the world to have the right balance of evil, natural and moral evil, and not evil, so as to bring the most people to the greatest number, the greatest knowledge of God that it could be, so that the most will be saved. Okay? So he's directly saying God creates evil for a purpose. Quentin Smith, atheist. I knew him years ago, lost touch. He said, this is ridiculous. Look, animals eating each other, people dying of smallpox, 500 million, count them. These were real people. It doesn't seem like anyone is in charge. That's a pretty reasonable position. The atheist is the one who is stating the purest thing in that context. The religious people are saying things that are actually an offense to God. They don't mean to. They mean to defend him, but they're really making him complicit with evil. And then Marilyn McCord Adams, author of Horrendous Evils and the Goodness of God, talking about responding to these theodicies, these explanations that construe suffering as being instructive. And no one denies that suffering can be instructive in some contexts. It's obvious. People learn a lot through making mistakes, and people learn a lot about the futility of a sinful path when their master plan falls apart. And that's, very helpful. Okay? But that's not really the problem of suffering. The problem of suffering is most manifested in those horrendous evils where it's pretty clear that they have no potential instructive value whatsoever because they just destroy a person. And I won't go into what those types of things can be. I'll spare you. But there's that counterexample to all of the rhetoric about, well, we learn from this stuff. And no one is really paying attention to that counterexample except for the atheists. But really, the Catholic faith begins with that issue of the horrendous evils, okay? The whole faith is a response to the problem of evil in its most gruesome form. And what God has done to help his suffering people. And it's through the cross and resurrection of Christ. Well, how does that help suffering people? Well, that's what's clarifying. But it's not introducing it new. It's really shining a light on what's already in the deposit of the faith, but no one's looking at it. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing in here that's new. It's you could basically rewrite the whole thing with quotes from the Catechism and from the Doctors of the Church. But this is totally new with reference to what's in the mind of Catholics and Christians. Okay? So what has happened? We've departed from what Jesus came to say. Even though we have all the sentences right, and we believe that the Eucharist is the real presence, okay, but we've lost the basics. And so who are we even praying to? Now, obviously the real God is there and hears and answers prayer, even if we don't, okay? But we've departed from orthodoxy, even though we're still Orthodox. And we don't even know it. So every way that evil afflicts the human sphere, he has countered. And he's countered it perfectly, taking away all of its power and turning it against itself. So even when there's evil, it works for a good. And so all power is taken into God's hand. And whatever the devil accomplishes works against the devil. And this is through the cross. And we don't know how to preach the cross anymore because our model of explaining it is in terms of language that doesn't make sense in light of modern questions. And everybody knows that, and that's why we just don't say it. Why doesn't it make sense? Okay, take the notion of original sin. First man and his wife did something that they shouldn't have done, and therefore everyone suffers henceforth. And not only that, but everyone is damned a priori, independently of anything that they do, and they need to be saved by God somehow. Well, first off, let's explore the question, why does one person's sin ruin everything for everybody, hence, and why would I be damned because he did something that I had no say in? Why does that separate me from God? We can't really explain that, so we don't even try. Right? We state it in the Catechism. And the Church is faithful to preserving what's been handed down in that way. But in terms of human beings going out in front of people and teaching this, we don't do it because it's obviously a sitting duck for anyone who wants to ask a question, and we don't have any way of answering them. So the next point, and it gets even worse here, is, okay, so in order to fix this situation where everybody is damned a priori, God sends his son to be tortured to death on a cross. And this somehow makes it so that God can make us not damned. He can forgive us. But forgive us for something that we didn't even do. Only, okay, the baby needs this cross of Christ, resurrection of Christ, in order to not go to hell. Well, but God just wanted to forgive us. Why did he have to torture somebody? Why was that important? Okay, well, so God's wrath is appeased because of this event where his son suffered. But, all right, well, but isn't God changeless? God can't transition from one state to another state. That's a necessary truth of theology. So how can we understand this without implying change in God? And how can we understand this without implying conflict in God, wrath versus mercy? Okay, so his justice was satisfied, and now we can go to heaven. But why did any of this have to happen in the first place? It doesn't make a damn bit of sense in that language. And that's not blasphemous because it actually doesn't make sense. Even the defenders of the church, the professional apologists, don't really know what the church is teaching on this. And there's this body of information that is just a set of canned thoughts about religious questions that it's been put forth by Catholics and non-Catholics, but there's this body of information that is totally different from church teaching, but it's mistaken for church teaching. It's come into the place where church teaching should be, and it appears to be what the Catholic faith is made of, but it really is against the Catholic faith. The notion that Jesus gets the justice, gets the wrath, and we get the mercy is contrary to the faith. There's a problem. Now,
and so hold on, just parenthetically, but the Pope agrees that that is not the case, right? So the Pope is actually against...
He knows that God is against evil, okay? And he doesn't say anything like what the other people are saying about means to an end. He says there is a plan, and indeed there is, okay? This is not left to chance. Nothing will be wasted or lost. That's true. He doesn't make the mistake of saying God says that this is a good way to get to the good end, that the evil is his, okay? Doesn't do that. He knows better. And he admits, and this is the crucial thing, he admits that we don't have the answers. He says, and this was in response to a little girl who got the opportunity to ask the Pope a question. Said, why do we suffer so much? Why do I have to be so afraid? He said, we don't have the answers. But Jesus suffered as a little child. He suffered in the same way that you suffered. And we know that that is somehow important. But we don't know the answers. And isn't that humble that he admitted that?
That's the mystery of our faith, though, wouldn't you say? The faith component to all of this type of content is key as well.
Tell me
that mystery of faith,
Okay.
that over and over in the gospel where Jesus says, your faith has healed you, your faith has made you well. So the faith component to reach certain conclusions through the mystery of our faith and our belief, what the church teaches. You know what I'm saying?
I want to, before I answer, I want to make sure that I answer exactly the question that you're asking. When you say the mystery of the faith, what do you mean by mystery?
Exactly what the Holy Father is saying, that we don't have all the answers.
Yes.
We would be in another place entirely if we had all knowledge. Obviously the Holy Spirit brings all those gifts of the Spirit of knowledge.
Okay, fine.
Etc.
Let me respond.
We're not God. We're made in His image and likeness. We're not God, so that's the key component of where faith comes in.
That's one true thing is, of course, we don't have all of the answers. Mystery, as defined by the Church, does not mean something akin to the lead curtain shielding out all light, and we just don't know what's behind it and we can't perceive. Mystery means actually the opposite. It means infinite intelligibility, and no matter how far we go, we can always go infinitely farther. There's always more to learn. There's always more depth, and we can never say, okay, it's done. Right? So there'll always be questions, and there'll always be answers to the questions. If it's possible to ask a question, it's possible to answer the question. And God is generous about drawing us forward. So the Catholic Church's view of mystery is not the pagan view of mystery, which is darkness and obscurity. The gods know, and they're not telling you. God has revealed himself in Jesus Christ.
Right.
And has invited us to come in. Now, how does this relate to the problem of evil? It does not mean that, okay, we got it all figured out, that this is all pretty clear now. No, it means that we can know that God is who he says he is, know that he's good. We know that he doesn't in any way approve of evil, okay? We know that he responds to evil, as Father Cantalamessa says, not with tolerance, not with aloofness. He doesn't permit it in that way, where permit means tolerate, but he reacts to it, as Father Cantalamessa says, with the fullness of his holiness. Reacts to it with the fullness of his holiness. He's not holding back. Okay? And we know that he's totally good as taught to us by the church. Now, what is this? Is this saying we got it all figured out? No. It's just preserving that God is totally good and he reacts to evil with the fullness of his holiness. Now, is there more to learn? Yes. This is just the start of how we can vindicate those notions of God's against evil and he's doing everything he possibly can to save us from it. How do we vindicate those essential notions from all the lies that are surrounding them? Well, this is the bare minimum for doing that. It is not saying we have it all figured out. It's defining against errors. This does not say, I understand the infinite goodness of God. I have the mind of God in my mind. No, it says we do understand what evil is. And the church tells us that this is an evil, that's an evil. Suffering in itself is an evil. The suffering of the innocent, apart from the redemption, is an evil. And that we understand what that is, for sure. And that whatever the infinite goodness of God is, it has nothing in common with that.
Right.
Okay? That's all that's being said here. So it's not going into that intellectual puffery where, yes, in my mind, I have this all mapped out. Far from it. It's just getting back to the mystery. This returns us to the mystery where we can actually be on the track as beings made in the image of God. We understand what that is, and we understand who God is most basically, that we can trust him, that he's good. And with that, we can just go ever deeper. So that's mystery.